afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Trivette, and I'm Associate Professor and Head of Special Collections and College Archives in the Gladys Marcus Library at the Fashion Institute of Technology. FIT is a part of the State University of New York. Today is October 30th, 2019, and it is about 10 minutes after 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I am very happy to introduce to you Professor Irene Buchman, who is our next interviewee in the series we call FIT Talks, which is the oral history program of FIT. And I want to welcome you, Irene, to the episode.
Thank you.
So just to begin and provide one bookend to the conversation, if you will, tell us a little bit about your childhood.
I was born and raised in Albany, New York, way upstate where it's very cold and snowy in the winter. I went to public school, elementary school, Albany High School. I had 3 much older brothers, although in a certain way I was an only child because they were so much older that they were somewhat out of the house when I was being raised, certainly when I was a teenager. But that's it. It was an easy, very nice childhood. Nice place to be raised. Very nice place to grow up in.
Do you have any memories of Mayor Corning?
Well, yes. Let's say when I went to college and there was a political science textbook on what's the word? A blank. Will you cut some of these blanks out, or no? You don't do that. It's terrible. Bosses. That's what I'm looking at. City bosses.
Oh yeah.
And when there was a chapter in the political science textbook about city bosses, they talked about Mayor Corning.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You can't think about Albany without Corning.
Powerful figure.
So, as a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I didn't know, but I knew one thing I was not going to be, and that was a teacher.
Oh, really?
I absolutely wasn't going to be a teacher, and I had no idea otherwise.
Gosh.
I have to interject that the time I was growing up and the time I was in high school and even through college, it was before the women's movement. And it was never asked to me what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do.
Wow.
I think it was basically assumed you'd grow up and you'd get married. So it was not discussed. And again, because I had brothers, that was discussed. They were the ones who were going to go on and have jobs and have careers, but not me. So that was the milieu, or the times, the context in which I was growing, which I think is very hard for young women to understand.
It is, and I'm a generation after you, and it's still, I take so much for granted in terms of opportunities I've had. What is your formal education?
Well, after Albany High School, I went to Brown University so long ago that there was an administrative piece of it called Pembroke College, which was the women's campus, but it was all one school. I mean, I went to Brown classes. I have a Brown University degree. So I went to Brown University, and after that, after working for a year or 2 in New York, I decided to go into teaching. And I went to Teachers College, Columbia University, and I got a master's in remedial reading, or psychology of reading, I think it was called. And then, I think kind of immediately I went on and got, not immediately, but shortly thereafter, I went into a doctoral program in learning disabilities.
That sounds very ambitious for someone without a vision growing up. Can you explain a little bit to us about how you developed a vision and then saw it to fruition?
Well, that's a good question. So when I was just going back about not having a vision, when I was applying to college, my mom said, this is stressful. You don't have to go to college. You could go to secretarial school.
Oh, wow.
And she was serious. And she wasn't putting me down. She just thought, why did I need to do anything else?
Well, that was one of the paths.
Yeah.
Traditional paths.
Right. It was the path she took. She never went to college. And So sort of going to college was the end for me. I mean, that was all I thought about. I knew I wasn't going to take that advice, and I wanted to go to a good college, or a good challenging college, and I did. Brown was wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
And but that was it. So after that, I had no idea. So I came to New York, and I got a job working in executive search firms, which now are very common. But I worked in what was literally the first executive search firm, and I think at that time there was one.
Wow.
And then there was a spin-off, and I went to work in that one. So it was very much a new field. And it was interesting because the men were the recruiters, and the girls, they were always, of course, called girls, worked as the secretaries, and there was a little office with about 4 to 6 women who were college educated, and it was called their research office. But there was no place else we would go. I mean, we just get that job. And I don't know, this was the 1960s, and it had a different ethos, and I actually said one day, am I going to just keep helping the rich get richer in this executive search firm? And I wanted to do something else. And had it been, I think, even 5 years later, I would have gone to law school.
Oh, wow.
Because that definitely was even in there a little bit. But I was never encouraged. I was actually discouraged. And so I thought about education, but I knew I didn't want to be a classroom teacher. Not because I don't respect that work. On the contrary, it's because I admire so much an ability to be able to teach reading, math, science, history, and I felt I can't do all that well. So I somehow discovered remedial education, remedial reading, and that very much appealed to me. I thought that the whole diagnostic aspect of it was challenging and the work was important, so I looked into it. I did it part-time, I did pretty quickly part-time, and I loved it immediately.
Oh.
I loved it. And then you say about goals, again, that was terrific. And then I got some very interesting jobs. I was very happy. And I was working at Northside Center for Child Development, which is a historically important child development center in Harlem. It was the first one in Harlem. And I was doing consulting work to the local schools about how to teach reading. And the woman I worked with, who I admired enormously, said to me one day, well, what do you see yourself doing in 10 years? I can't begin to tell you how that question sort of almost unsettled me. Because I literally had never thought of that. And I think men always were thinking about that, or thinking about career paths and so forth, and I think women do now, but I had never thought of it. And I was sort of shaken by that, and I thought about it. At the time I was teaching one course here, and I was working at Northside, and I thought this was a great mix, college students and helping teachers, doing a little bit of work with young kids. I thought, what could be better? I'll just stay on this path.
Sure.
And they were all part-time jobs. They weren't even full-time jobs, but it's fine. And that made me think, if I am going to do other things or veer more towards college work or even other things, I would need a doctorate. And that's what got me going. So it was this question that had never occurred to me, and that's what got me moving.
Wow. So how, you mentioned coming to New York City. What was the push behind that decision?
Friends were here.
Yeah.
Friends were
Yeah.
And a boyfriend.
Oh, okay. Now the truth comes out. And you also mentioned briefly that you were teaching a course here at FIT. What was that course?
It was the Remedial English course.
Okay, very good. So what experiences stand out most for you in your tenure here at FIT? And maybe start with a little bit of a chronology of your positions you've held here at FIT.
Okay, so I started in the Remedial Department, which at the time was housed in the English Department. And it was a small but very, very, very good staff with Mildred Rothman, a really dedicated, smart woman who had the department. I'd met her doing graduate work, and she asked me to come and teach a course.
Okay.
And we worked under grants, federal grants, and then at some point we established our own Department of Educational Skills, which still stands. And I taught courses in it, and I loved it. I loved the students. I loved my colleagues. It was very good. And then at some point, I guess somewhere along there, I started the Learning Disabilities Program. I don't know if you know that, Karen.
I did not.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I got a grant to do that because that was my doctoral work, and that was really very interesting. And that's still, it's morphed a little bit and now housed over in Student Services, but it's been here all these years. It's been 30 years.
Oh my gosh.
And then actually when I went out on maternity leave, I handed it over to another wonderful woman, Gail Ballard, and I never went back to running that, but would always talk with Gail.
Yeah.
And then at some point I got a call from about the idea of doing some honors courses. And I loved the idea, and they asked me to get involved, and it was very small at the time. It was a student would be allowed to take one honors course in their AAS program and one in the bachelor's. And that was it. And the course could substitute, as they do now, for other required courses. And we did some meetings with the students, and they loved it. It was very cool. So I kept trying to expand it. So I went to the Liberal Arts Department and said, well, why can't they do 2 in each program? You know, their second year and their last year got okays. And then I think I maybe even got it up to 3. I don't remember. But I kept pushing it. And the faculty loved it. You see, I always presented it as this is an advantage to the students. And it's an advantage to the faculty to be able to teach a more advanced course in an area that they love.
Yes.
So the liberal arts faculty graciously bought into it right away. And so that went on for a while. And then it was so clear that students were hungry for more of this and that we could do more, that I started going to conferences and thinking about it and coming up with a plan and then doing the kind of thing you have to do in any organization, presenting it slowly, getting your idea out, talking to all the different constituencies, and going around and around the curriculum department, the curriculum committee of the faculty association, the registrar's office, admissions, the dean, everybody. I worked up, kept going round and round and round and round, and finally we got the go-ahead. And I know exactly when it started because it's 20 years this fall.
Oh, wonderful.
And it's also President Brown's 20th anniversary. And she always says, I know how old your program is because we started at the same time. The Presidential Scholars Program started very small 20 years ago. But the concepts we built into the program really remain. And I think it is fair to say that it thrived. The students thrived in it. It grew, and it was not only accepted, but I think very well respected in the college.
Sure.
And it gives me enormous satisfaction, one, to have seen it grow, and then to know that when I retired, Professor Yasmin Selek is running the program even better.
Oh.
She's really wonderful, and she's added a very interesting intellectual component to it, a senior seminar with research, which we did not have, and so that gives me great satisfaction.
What were some of your early impressions of FIT?
Well, again, it's I started so long ago. This is something that, Karen, you probably know this, but you might not even know it. It was just the C building.
Right.
Yeah, was that called the Feldman Building now?
It's called Marvin Feldman Center.
Do people still call it just the C building?
Yes.
Yes, like Third Ave, so it was just one building for the whole school.
Yes.
So that's where every department, all the different schools had their faculty offices, and all the classes were held. where the faculty cafeteria was.
The library.
The library, everything was in that one building.
Amazing.
So that was amazing. And consequently, you got to meet more faculty across the disciplines, which was terrific.
Sure.
And there was much more mingling in the cafeteria and so forth. That lasted a while with the expansion, but I think the school has grown, and I don't know, when I left, the people in the D building never hardly ever walked over to the faculty cafeteria for lunch anymore, so there was less of that mingling. Marvin Feldman, the president under whom I was hired and was here for he had a long tenure, and I think it was really under Marvin that the school grew so much.
Absolutely.
He was a character and had a vision, and I would say that he fostered an entrepreneurial spirit here, so that new departments got added. If you had an idea, you could go with it.
Nice.
So I went to him with the idea. He fought me a little bit. He was it was before this, he was sort of had the 60s ethos too about, well, isn't that elitist? And I would say to him, Marvin, do we accept anybody into the fashion design program?
Exactly.
Aren't they all accepted on our portfolio? Is that elitist? And so we would have long discussions, and finally he came on board. Although we did decide to call it the Presidential Scholars Program, we thought that might help a little bit. So I admire that entrepreneurial spirit, which I think enabled me to start this program.
And you mentioned the satisfaction that the students derived from the program. How would you say the student body changed over time while you were here at FIT?
Oh, I think that academically the student body has improved. I think the students are simply more prepared.
Yes.
I think we've been able to be choosier. I am not one of those faculty. I mean, you hear this all over. Oh, the students aren't like what they used to be. You know what they don't know. They didn't know, blah, blah, blah. Sure, there's a lot of stuff they don't know, especially in the old geezer's point of view. But in general, I would say that the academic level of the student body has gone up over the years. And of course, I got to work with the top students.
Absolutely. No, I'm always impressed. We have a pretty robust internship program here in special collections, and we pull from undergraduate programs, graduate programs, and stellar attitudes, focus, you name it. Just really impressive.
Well, talk about attitude. I just want to give a plug for our students. I think the attitude has not changed in that they are really hardworking, driven students who do not feel entitled.
Exactly.
That's a SUNY plus, I think.
I agree completely.
I have friends who have businesses and so forth or whatever and have asked for interns, and I would send out an email on the honor students. I say, well, I know a place where you can get really smart and hardworking students. I have a friend of mine who's an architect. For 10 years, maybe more than that, he would only take interns from FIT.
Wow.
He's had, students, friends of, good colleges. The kids would work for him, and he said, the FIT kids are really smart, really hardworking, and have no sense of entitlement. So it's very refreshing.
That's certainly a feather. You mentioned the Dean of Liberal Arts. Do you recall who that was at the time?
Oh, Gladys Marcus.
That's what I thought.
I adored Gladys.
Oh, tell us a little bit about her.
As so many of us did.
Oh, yes.
Gladys was such a classy lady.
Oh.
She might have been here from the absolute beginning of the school. I'm not sure. If not from the very beginning, very early on.
Yeah.
She was a political scientist.
I don't see her name in the early records of the college, but it's certainly something to look into.
Yeah, but she was here very early on, and she was a faculty member. Her field was political science, but the whole time I know her, she was dean, and she was dean for a very long time.
Yes.
And was very smart, very supportive of people, a lot of fun to talk to. She was great.
Did you hold any other roles while you were here at FIT?
Yes, somewhere along the line, my first major other role was actually, it was just before I was starting the honors program, and by this time President, so maybe when I was just starting it, so concurrent, because President Brown was here, and the Dean of Business and Technology had retired, and they were in an interim period, and I was asked if I could be acting dean for business and technology, which is pretty funny because I'm in liberal arts. I mean, it is not my area. I think what they wanted was just, honestly, someone who was sensible.
And could run a program.
And could run a program.
Yes.
And so I did that for 2 years till they hired a full-time dean, and I enjoyed it very much. I mean, I loved meeting and getting to know better my colleagues on the business side, and so that was a very nice stint. And then several years later, a similar situation happened in the liberal arts college school, which was also that was my home school. And they asked me if I would step in temporarily, and so I was acting dean of liberal arts for a little while, and because that was an area I knew, but I knew. Sometimes people would say to me, "Well, don't you want to do that instead of?" It's like, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but honestly, I always said when I was working here, this is not a retrospective feeling, that I had the best job at FIT. And I can assure you that being a dean here is not the best job at FIT. It's just a tough job. You're a lot in the middle of things. It's a tough job. And it's not so much, I don't mind tough jobs. I don't mind working. But you don't get the satisfactions that I got from my job. When you're a dean, a little bit when you're a chair, also more so when you're a dean, as you got the letter, you get all the student problems.
Yes.
They've risen to you. The chair couldn't solve it, or the teacher couldn't solve it, the chair couldn't solve it. Now you got to deal with that issue. So it's usually a yucky issue.
Yeah.
And I got to work with the great students and who were doing great things, and you could work with them on those projects or hear about. They would come running into your office and tell you that the internship they just got, or they just got, or they might want to. It was so satisfying. It was like, no, there was never a question in my mind that I wanted to do that.
And forgive me, but did you mention how long you were?
2 years, basically 2 years in each stint. Yeah, I also did under Gladys. No, I know what it was. When Gladys Marcus was dean, Gladys did all the Middle States reports.
Oh goodness! Yes.
So that was Jack Gladys. She's very smart, she's a very good writer. So Gladys did it all, and then Gladys was here and then became very ill. And one year, I don't know if Gladys had just, I don't really remember it exactly, but maybe she had died and then it was the next time around or something. They asked me if I would do the Middle States report.
Wow.
First, I think the 5-year review, that comes first, and then the Middle States report, and I did it, and then I did it when I was dean. So I was in charge of the Middle States for several years. Not the most fun project at the school.
I'm sure not just in terms of detail, I would think.
Yeah.
Just the encrusting detail.
Yeah, and it's not a thrilling thing to work on. It's something one has to do.
Yes.
But it's not the kind of work. I mean, I did it. I worked hard at it. We did very well through the process. But I was happy after a couple of these when all the deans were in place and they handed it over to one of the deans. I was back in and I think I worked on it, but it's happy not to do that.
Well, for those listening who don't know what the Middle States is, give us a
Oh,
brief
it's our accrediting agencies.
Yes.
All colleges have to be accrediting, so you have to do all these reports, some data, and a lot of writing for the accreditors.
What are some points of measure that you recall?
I try to forget all of these things.
I'm sure.
I have
No
really.
That's just fine. I'll go back to something that you lit up when
Right.
you mentioned, which is the projects of your students in the Presidential Scholars Program. What projects stand out to you that really sort of captured your attention?
Oh, I actually have sort of forgotten about our projects because they were replaced by the research program, which I think is really very good and more academic. But honors programs traditionally have an honors thesis, senior thesis, and because of the nature of our majors here, the honors program is only in liberal arts. I think I referenced that. We couldn't figure out how to do that. It was enough that we figured out how to get all the honors courses in. So I wanted a project. So first I started as a juniors honors project. No, I started as a senior project because senior thesis, that's what everyone does. And then at FIT, students in their senior year are crazed.
I know.
Crazed. And that was a mistake.
Oh.
So then I made it a juniors honors project, and it was a requirement. And it's centered on New York. It was a study of New York. And they would work in small groups. And in the first semester, they would research. There would be a theme each year, like major New Yorkers or neighborhoods or a trend. And they would do a research paper that they would hand in. And I had a faculty committee that would read them. And then in the spring semester, they would find a way of presenting that in a lively way that FIT students are so good at to the entire Pres Scholars program. So one of our colloquia would be in the spring was dedicated to the juniors honors projects. So they did it in whatever clever way they could come up with, and they were so much fun.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was a lot of fun.
I remember being involved when you focused on The Great Gatsby. That was a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Just rereading the novel and then working with the students to unpack it.
Yeah.
That was great fun.
Yeah. That brings to mind another project we had. That was what we call our summer read. And Yasmin is still doing it, and that was fabulous. At some point I decided we needed that intellectual spirit shared among all the students. And so every summer I would assign a book. And then the reason I guess you got involved was that we would have this, and Yasmin is still doing it and says it is great. There would be, that was one of our colloquia. So at each table, and there's a lot of background work, behind stage work to that.
Boy.
Because at each table, I made a point of going through all this list. It was so complicated. I would forget each year, how did I do this? So that there would be a representative from the freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors at each class, and there would be a representative across the department. So there'd be art and design kids and business and technology kids.
Right.
And then we would have a faculty who thought this would be interested be there with the students. And I'm glad you say that because that faculty feedback has been great.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Because there's just such an energy and spirit that I remember associated with that event.
Yeah.
And it's shared.
Exactly.
So that made it doubly exciting to experience.
Yeah. And these things go on. I mean, I got an email a couple of years ago from one of the alums who said they're making a movie of First They Killed My Father, which was one of our summer reads. It's a very emotional story about the Cambodian Holocaust, and Angelina Jolie got the rights and had it made into a movie. So then the movie comes out, and so she sends out a note to everybody on our alumni listserv saying, I'm showing the movie in my apartment. Do people want to come? So a whole bunch of us went to her apartment. We all squeezed in, and she had it somehow projected. And it's so satisfying how these experiences live on.
Yes.
It's very satisfying.
Well, we've talked about a few points of your trajectory here at FIT, and I'm curious, it seems like not only the built environment, but the student body must have changed dramatically over time, not just in terms of their, I don't know, you mentioned ethos, but also their quantity. I mean, when you first started here, you were in the one building.
Right.
You must have only had, maybe a couple of thousand students, and it's swollen
Right.
over
Absolutely
the years.
Grown, right.
How do you think that's had an impact on the operation of FIT?
That's an interesting question. Well, it's harder to be nimble.
Mm-hmm.
I said that Marvin was a real entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's harder to have a real entrepreneurial spirit in a larger environment.
Yeah.
It's harder to be nimble in a larger environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder for faculty to be close. I mean, there's all sorts of positive attempts to keep this up. I don't mean that it isn't happening,
Of course.
but it's harder,
Yes.
and it has to be worked at. So that's something. I think students probably don't get as much cross-fertilization as they more easily did in the old days. That's one of the advantages of the Presidential Scholars Program, was that when we would admit, to this day, we also have these charts, and we admit, not completely, but we really want to get a balance of art and design and B&T kids.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned even at our first colloquium, when we do the book, we make sure that at each table, so that and students will often say to me, oh, this is the only chance I get to really meet students in the other programs.
Well, like you said, and it's not exclusive to the senior experience, but the loads, the course loads and project loads that the students here carry just stun me.
It's absolutely, it is stunning, the
the
amount of work they do.
Absolutely. And like the swelling of the student population, there's also been this dramatic change and growth in the number of programs offered at FIT over the years. Do you have any reflections on that?
By and large, I think that's all positive. Some are very specialized. Some have come and gone. And that always can be looked at, but overall I think that's very positive.
Do you recall a particular program or number of programs that really seem to align best with the Presidential Scholars?
No. I would say that's not the case.
Right.
I would say that we've had students from all the majors in our program. We used to say we want the kids, they have to apply to the program. We don't just bestow this on the high-achieving students.
Right.
So it's the kids they come to FIT because they're career-oriented, they're driven. That's what they want. That's why they're here. But they didn't really want to give up their intellectual curiosity. They actually liked their English courses. They liked their history courses, and they want that stimulation. And, those kids crop up in every major at FIT.
Yeah.
So I would absolutely not say that there was one major that was more aligned than others.
Okay. And you mentioned the application process, or that there is an application process. What were some of the criteria that you would use to measure applicants?
It's hard.
Yeah.
I think I can't say that I mastered admissions. Admissions is not easy. I mean, we're seeing lawsuits about admissions now at major universities in the country, so it's a tricky area, and I cannot say I have any great wisdom on that. We always required SAT scores. The school did not. We did. We required an essay. Teacher recommendations, so and high school average. I mean, actually, high school average was the most important thing to me. I think statistics say, is one of the reasons to do away with SATs, statistics say that high school averages have the highest correlation to success in college. But I wasn't an admissions officer, and it's hard to compare high school averages in different schools. So I did look at SAT and ACT scores.
How would the students learn about the Presidential Scholars Program?
The website.
I guess if you're driven as a student, you look for those sorts of opportunities.
Yeah, but we always did a second admit in rising juniors, because so many people would come to me the first 2 years and say, I wish I had known about this. I never heard about this program. I can't tell you how many really strong students would say that. So, they did learn. There could have been more, but that's always the case.
Of course, of course. What person had the most positive influence in your life? And there doesn't have to be just one.
Well, I guess I'd have to say my parents. I mean, not in this career thing, because as I said, they didn't care what I did. It's not that they didn't care what I did. Of course they cared what I did, but they were not ambitious themselves, and they were certainly not ambitious for me. So, they didn't expect a girl. So I didn't get that from them, but they were just good folk. Good, hardworking folk, and they gave me, I don't like to be highfalutin, but I think values as to how one should be. I always laugh. We were 4, as I mentioned. I always laugh when people said, "Oh, well, I was my mom's favorite, my sibling," and I didn't hear that expression until I was much older, and I thought, "What? What do you mean?" I mean, it was so clear to me that our parents loved all of us.
Yes.
It never, when I never felt that, and I looked up to my brothers like they were gods, but I never felt my parents loved me less than they loved these. So they were just good folks. So I guess they had an influence on me. I had an educator. I'm Jewish, and I went to a Hebrew school in Albany, New York, that, strangely enough, I don't know why I'm saying strangely, because I think they usually are not academically strong, happened to be academically stronger than Albany High.
Oh, wow.
It was very unusual and intellectually more stimulating, which is why I stayed in it. And it was because the director was amazing. And he was this amazing educator. He was a little, kooky isn't the right word, but passionate, directed. He was very smart. He would push us to think, to expose us. We all went to see Billy Budd together and had a discussion about Billy Budd. And he had this combination of being very intellectual, but a real doer, and he was amazing. So I've always thought that he was actually probably the best educator I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess he had an influence on me.
Sort of in the same vein, do you remember someone saying something to you that had a significant impact on how you lived your life? I know you mentioned your parents, but was there, in this educator, but was there another person that might have said something that turned you around a corner?
Well, I mentioned earlier this friend of mine who said to me, "What do you see yourself doing in 10 years?" And that definitely really affected my whole career path. I wouldn't be here. Well, I'm retired, but I wouldn't be here retired from FIT were it not for that comment, because I'm sure I wouldn't have gotten my doctorate. I don't know. I feel blessed. I have very good family members, good relationships with my family, 2 wonderful boys, and lots of friendships. I value what my friends say. I have a good, very close, long group of women friendships. So I don't know that there's one, but I do value conversations with friends a lot.
Yes, yes. as a librarian, I couldn't not ask the question, what book influenced you the most?
I think I would. Can I pass? I'm so sorry, Karen. I think I have to pass on that. I can't think of a book that influenced me the most. Different times, different ones.
Of course.
I'm sorry, Karen. I feel like passing on that to a librarian is terrible.
This is absolutely free form, no worries. What would you say are your future plans?
Well, I say to my students, you know, I worked till I was very old here because I love my job so much, and I loved the work with the students. It was so satisfying, and they were appreciative. I mean, what could be better?
No.
But finally, I knew I had to retire and turn it over to young blood with new ideas, and so I always said, I don't know, I have no hobbies, what am I going to do? And so my line now is that to no one's surprise but my own, I'm really loving retirement. I've gotten myself involved in a couple of projects that I would like to keep developing that have been very fulfilling. I mean, I do the normal. I love to travel. I love to hike. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to do that at my age, but I still am hiking.
Wonderful.
I'm taking a Spanish class. I'm absolutely terrible.
Oh.
But, I'm having fun with it, taking some courses at Fordham. But what really has been fulfilling to me is two projects. One is it's a women's project that I do with a friend of mine, and came about, I know I don't want to be political, but it came about during the last presidential campaign when it seemed that the tenor, it really felt, was so divisive about groups not only coming in, but different groups within our country. And that is so against everything that I value. And anyways, we came up with the idea, let's bring people together across, we ended up, let's work with women and bring people together across the age range and across different ethnic groups. And so we have this amazing group of women who from ages 22 to, actually we have one woman who's 94, who's still working.
Oh, wow.
And we get together 4 times a year, centering on food.
Oh.
But I do bring my Press Scholars Director's hat in that very early on I said, you know what, we need a speaker. And so every time we bring in a speaker, we start off with a speaker on some important social topic. Usually, it's always been a woman who runs some foundation or agency or something, and it's been fascinating.
Wow.
Then we move into food mode, and one of the women teaches us how to make something from her ethnic cuisine. Actually, one of our alums is in the group, and she taught us how to make Chinese scallion pancakes.
Oh my goodness.
So delicious. And then we do, it's not just a little, like a demo. Then after the demo, we all get on a long table like this, and we have all the ingredients, and we're rolling and making and frying, and we make the food. And then we quickly clear up, and we do some potluck, and then we all sit down to a really lovely lunch with whatever food we made and a lovely lunch. It has been so satisfying because this mix of ages and groups, as we've met, it's been 2 years now.
Wow.
They're starting to form connections. It has been wonderful.
Gosh.
And I've just started with this other woman a kind of a similar thing. The similar thing is that we have what my friend calls an intentionally diverse group of people across age and ethnic group. But this time we allow men. It's men and women. And this is to simply share the experience of music in an intimate setting.
Oh, my.
So in her very large and beautiful apartment, we're bringing in, and the idea is different genres of music. hoping that, again, a community will build.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did one in June, and we had 2 opera singers, a young, beautiful young woman from the Harlem Opera Theater and a tenor from the Opera Theater, and then their director pianist, talking about it with us, singing arias to us, and then doing some gospel. Actually, it was an astounding afternoon, and we're having one this coming Sunday. And we're having a percussionist doing African percussions.
Cool.
And so that's going to be cool and interesting.
Yes.
So that's been very satisfying. So I'm having fun and I'm learning, but it has the kind of fulfilling quality to it that my work did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't know how long it will continue, but I'm enjoying all the things I'm doing.
That's thrilling to hear. And this might seem like an odd question, but when someone watches this footage and then turns it off, what would you like people to remember most?
I guess that I'm a kind of a just do it kind of gal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know how to work, go through, but basically I want to just do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you do have an idea, I mean, you do have to go through the channels, and you want to be as politic and careful as you can. That actually has to be done.
Yes.
But stick with it and
Yeah.
try it. And hopefully the idea is an idea that brings people together,
Mm-hmm.
that fosters community and civil discourse,
Mm-hmm.
not the opposite.
Emphasis on civil. So, last question is, what question did I not ask you that you wish I had? Not meant to be a trick.
Okay. Well, I guess, I don't know if it's a question, but I guess the other part of the program that's been so nice for me in my retirement is that I keep up with the alums.
Oh, wonderful.
After like the first year, the second year, and all these wonderful kids were graduating, I said to them one day, I said, maybe I have separation anxiety, but I don't want to see you all go. So we started an alumni program, and that has grown. And we have a very active listserv, so I hear what's going on, and sometimes I post things, and not a lot, but mostly they're posting things. And then every year we have an alumni event. And after I retired, basically I said to Yasmin, she was overwhelmed by all the aspects of this program. I said, I don't know, overwhelmed. She's the most competent person in the world, so I don't mean that. But I said, because she didn't know any of the alums, I knew the alums. And I loved it so much, I said, would you like me to help with the programming for that? She said, sure. So I've had it at my house for the last couple of years, and the colloquium has been so much fun, so I brought in speakers again.
Oh, very good.
And it's like one year I was able to get the young woman who had just finished her clerkship for Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh, my goodness.
And then we read the book RBG. I don't know if you've seen that really hip book.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been great fun seeing them and seeing the friendships that they formed and that they keep up over these years. It's been amazing to me and very satisfying.
Well, the word community seems to keep coming up with you, Professor. So I think it's a natural sort of result in all that you've done, that you've created these communities that have thrived. And I cannot thank you enough for being with us today.
Well, my pleasure. I love the school. You can tell I love the program, but I certainly love the school. It's dear to my heart, and I have absolutely no regrets that I didn't become a lawyer.
Thank you again.
Thank you.